Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world with self-care strategies from Chinese medicine. I'm your host, Brody Welch, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Before diving into the show today, I wanted to say thank you to someone who left a really kind review in iTunes. He or she left 5 stars and goes by what I can only interpret as did it. The review goes, Brody Welch is the whole shebang. She's unbelievably knowledgeable about alternative healthcare and wellness, and she knows how to communicate that knowledge in a way that is accessible but not condescending. I had a great conversation with her and deeply appreciate her spirit of curiosity about people and ideas. Plus, her voice is smooth and calming. She's a real joy to listen to. Wow. Thank you. I really appreciate those words, and I really appreciate that you took the time to go into iTunes and rate and review the show, because that is the main way that other people can find it and therefore be able to empower themselves with all this amazing information that my guests, like apparently this person with the unpronounceable nickname, are able to share. So please head over to iTunes, click on A Healthy Curiosity, go to the rate and review section, and let me know what you're appreciating about the show, and I might feature you at the top of one of our next episodes. Okay, now to today's show. Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and today I get to talk to a fellow Chinese medicine geek. I've got Dr. Eric Karchmer with me, and we're going to talk about the yin and yang of the menstrual cycle, as well as women's health concerns throughout life and what can be done about it from a lifestyle, diet, Chinese herbal, and acupunctural perspective. Eric's fascination with Chinese medicine began over 30 years ago when he ventured to China to teach English. His passion eventually translated into an unusual career in what he calls academic medicine. He earned a Ph.D. in anthropology from the University of North Carolina, spent 5 years earning a Bachelor's of Medicine from the renowned Beijing University of Chinese Medicine, and attended Princeton for his undergraduate studies. He's published numerous scholarly articles on Chinese medicine and will finish his book manuscript, Orientalizing the Body, Postcolonial Transformations in Chinese Medicine, later on this year. Dr. Eric Karchmer, Ph.D., thank you so much for joining me here today.
Hi, Brody. Thanks for that very gracious introduction.
So it's, as I said, I've been interviewing a lot of functional medicine docs lately. I've been interviewing fellow yoga health coaches, and it's been a while since I've just gotten to talk with somebody about what Chinese medicine, which is one of my first loves in life, how it can help people with any particular aspect of life. And so today we're going to be honing in on women's health in particular as a vehicle for hopefully helping people come behind our lens and look at themselves in a new way. Because I really believe that the more people can understand that, even though it is this foreign system that most of us were not raised with, that there is a lot of logic to it, and it can be actually quite intuitive. So I'd love to know first of all, how do you go about explaining for example, the menstrual cycle to your patients? How do you help people wrap their heads around something that in our culture is just like, oh yeah, it's this thing that you have to deal with as a woman. It's just kind of it's just kind of a hassle, and it makes you cranky and in pain and having to think a little bit hard about what you're going to wear. So what is it in Chinese medicine? And why is it a uniquely valuable clue as to what's going on inside the body?
Well, I think Chinese medicine is such an important approach to things, just like managing a woman's menstrual cycle. For me, I always come back to this idea of balance or regulation. And if you study Chinese medicine as you have, one of the first things you learn about the menstrual cycle is you have to regulate it. And there's a very interesting word in Chinese that doctors use, this idea of tiao jie, which means to modulate or regulate. So it's not so easy necessarily to explain it to women, but I think women who are looking for something a little bit different will latch onto that idea. One analogy I like to use is, you know, in biomedicine or Western medicine, when we're treating the menstrual cycle, we have these like incredibly powerful tools, often birth control pills, things that, or if you're getting into fertility treatments, things that can totally like sort of hijack that whole hormonal feedback loop in the body that is central to a woman's menstrual cycle. It's kind of like, I would say, kind of like the sledgehammer, and the approach in Chinese medicine is sort of the watchmaker's tools, I think, if you will. It's always fine adjustments,
Mm.
but I think it's precisely because it's these fine adjustments that's where sort of the real power and the beauty of it is. And so for women who are ready to sort of, you know, take that different perspective and think about like what are the little things they can do to um, improve their menstrual cycle, or whether it's that, or perhaps deal with fertility or things like that. There's just a, you know, there's just oodles of sort of wisdom to be mined from the Chinese medicine perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate that you mentioned that sort of it can be quite heavy-handed to think of the hormonal sledgehammer versus the more delicate means that we have by which we can regulate the cycle and really not regulate it from like I mean that almost sounds too masculine to me, you know, like but
Yeah, I
how
think you're right.
you know how we can actually work with the body and how we can listen to the menstrual cycle as clues as to what might be out of balance in our lives as a whole. And so so first off, a lot of times people assume that because a lot of women struggle with things like PMS and cramps or fertility challenges, that that's just normal, right? And as opposed
Yes,
to a sign of
yes,
imbalance in the body. So really like a normal period should be one that really is like pretty easy and doesn't really affect that doesn't really have these it doesn't pull in your psyche to make you more anxious or depressed. It doesn't create outbreaks on your skin. It doesn't lead to headaches. It doesn't lead to loose stools or constipation. It doesn't lead to pain, you know, anywhere. That basically it's just something that happens. Would you agree with that assessment?
Oh, absolutely, and it shouldn't be too long or too short, and there shouldn't be, you know, really heavy blood flow, nor should it be very little and scanty. The color should be kind of right in the middle. I mean, that's exactly the Chinese medicine perspective. It really should be in that sort of golden mean is your goal, and then the result of that is a lot of those other discomforts, whether it's cramping or PMS or um, the emotional ups and downs, the headaches, whatever, all of that sort of just kind of fades away once you kind of can get to that sort of
Yeah.
magical point of balance. Yeah.
So, from a Chinese medicine standpoint, what is your most common diagnosis for women who are having issues with the period? I know what mine is, but I'd love to just hear
Oh.
yours.
um, you know, that's hard to. It's a little hard to say because I think I tend to get in my clinic. I think I tend to get the harder cases that are,
Mhm.
um, uh, uh, you know, maybe a little bit trickier to treat. But I would say that the two biggest things probably are chi stagnation and probably maybe blood deficiency. Of some sort. I don't know. Do you agree? Do you see other kinds of
Liver qi
complications?
stagnation, hands
Hands
down.
down.
Yeah, and I see a lot of yin deficiency as well. I see a lot of
Yeah.
women who are doing way too much,
Hmm.
expect having high standards for themselves, not necessarily taking the time to nourish themselves adequately with whole foods, with adequate rest. Who are maybe like they get off of their demanding job and they either go home to kids or they don't go home to kids but go to like a CrossFit class and they're you know like they're just working they're working themselves or they're
Yeah.
recovering from working doing these things that they think are actually helpful but are quite depleting. And so so I would see in terms of like Chinese medicine and root cause of what's going on with the menstrual cycle. I see a lot of liver qi stagnation, which in Chinese medicine terms, like I think about explaining liver qi stagnation to people as that if the liver is the free and easy wanderer, right? The liver is supposed to enable us to move from activity to, well, to first of all, to transition us easily from one
Yes.
part of, to from one thing to the next. And to do to do it in a relaxed and even keel way. And so if our lives feel like we're perpetually stepping on the gas, if it's all yang and no yin, if we feel like we're tight, if we're, if we are moving through life with a degree of pressure and driving and striving as opposed to ease, that's going to interfere, that's going to make it more difficult for the energy to flow freely through the body, which could make it difficult to fall asleep at night, which could make the timing in the digestive system wonky, and which can make the period quite unpleasant. And so
Yeah.
so yeah, the liver qi stagnation piece, which is I think so important in terms of if we think about what's going on with the cycle, that it's got to be a smooth transition from the estrogenic phase to the progesteronic phase of the cycle. There has to be there has to be ease in that. And so I think a lot of times helping women deal with stress and recognize the connection that stress is having on what we call the liver, because it's the liver
Mm.
blood that is the period, right, for the most part, and
Right,
the
right.
chong. And so, and that is a massive factor, as well as and I guess like we can talk about this a little later, but the relative estrogen dominance that people are coming in with, because we're swimming in a sea of xenoestrogens, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how to protect themselves from that, and what to do about it. But
Mm.
anyway, I'm curious if you had
But
anything to add to my liver chi stagnation spiel.
well, I think I love the word you use. I think transition is like such a important word, because that also, I mean, the menstrual cycle is, you know, a series of transitions. It's kind of like you know, from a Chinese medicine perspective, it would be a sort of a yin and yang cycle. And so, you know, there's that transition, as you mentioned, sort of at ovulation, going from the estrogenic part of the cycle to the progesteronic start of the cycle, and then as well as when your period starts. And those need to be as smooth as possible. And that idea of like of chi stagnation is such a useful idea for thinking about that. And I would say, you know, the other thing too is that, you know, we can have, especially as women get a little bit older, into their 30s, or into their 40s, then we start adding sort of different types of deficiencies on top of that. And, you know, recognizing that we need to protect ourselves a little bit so that we can um, uh, um, you know, avoid some of the potential problems that can come, or more easily, that come more easily in those at that time, um, is also super important. So,
So let's drill down on that a little bit. What kind of deficiencies are you talking about that you see?
well, you know, if you're sort of getting into that perimenopausal, you know, moment in life, perhaps in your mid 30s or late 30s, and you might you might start seeing a lot of bleeding and spotting. You know, perhaps at the beginning or at the end of your cycle. Those could be, you know, something to be looking out for. Um, uh, heavy periods also likewise have had, you know, that in turn will lead to also like a blood deficiency. Had some I've had some really interesting cases of patients with like being in tremendous amount of pain after sort of years of just like uh, heavy periods. And so I think kind of like recognizing that, you know, these trends, if they kind of go on for you know, over a long period of time, ultimately sort of then deplete the body in some way or another. And it might be other ways too, but
And
it'll
that
catch up with you.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And this could be happening. I think it's important to point out that just because it doesn't show up on a Western lab test doesn't mean that it's
Yes.
not there from a Chinese medicine perspective. Because again, we think about health as this continuum, that there is something, there can be an imbalance in the system energetically that exists before it manifests as a symptom that we're able to discern. And so so for example, if you've been bleeding heavily for many cycles and you're not doing anything to address that, you might not be clinically anemic or blood deficient but on a Western test, but we might diagnose you as acupuncturists with blood deficiency if you tell us things like that you are just really tired, more so than usual, and you're having trouble falling asleep at night, and maybe your muscles feel a little bit more stiff than usual, or maybe you feel a little spacey, that those could be things that we could say that could put you in that category as being capital B blood deficient, as in not just having the enough of the red stuff that runs in your veins, but that which allows you. It's the medium of emotions. It's the medium of identity. It helps us feel powerful and strong and capable. And so, not having enough of it, it's easy to feel insecure. It's easy to feel that a bit unsure of yourself, in addition to those physical symptoms that I just mentioned.
Absolutely, and sort of learning to sort of tap into not the sort of the lab room results that you get back from your biomedical doctor or your OBGYN, but into some of those more subtle things that are you experience quite clearly, that are perhaps at a more symptomatic level. It's like super important. You were just reminding me of a patient I treated once. It's kind of a long story, but she, if I remember correctly, maybe she was 49 or 50, getting not in menopause, but getting close to it, and then had many years of heavy periods, and got a case of the flu just before her period started. Was sort of recovering from the flu as her period started, and then as a result of that, ended up in like sort of tremendous like pain, not like you couldn't really call it just menstrual cramping, because it was sort of like almost their entire body, and she ended up at the ER, and I think was on oxycodone for several days, and before her husband finally called me to go see her, and ended up treating her with herbal medicine. But it was really a clear case of sort of blood deficiency. It was sort of she responded pretty quickly to herbal medicine treatments, but it was kind of inexplicable to from that biomedical perspective. The ER doctors were like, "Here, take some painkillers. We don't know what's going on." But so that perspective from Chinese medicine is also like a really powerful one too, that can really explain some things that we can't understand sometimes from other perspectives.
Oh, thanks for sharing that story. That's it's helpful.
It was really interesting.
Quick announcement about a mind body detox day that I'm going to be hosting on April 14th, which is a Saturday. In Chinese medicine philosophy, the energies of the seasons are reflected in our bodies and minds and emotions as well. And the season of the spring is associated with the liver, which is all about new growth, and also detoxifying our lives from what no longer serves us. And this happens on a mental, emotional, and spiritual as well as physical level. So I'm inviting you to join me for a day where we're going to align with the chi of spring and support our livers so that we can handle stress better, so that we can support our courage, clarity, creativity, and self-expression, keep ourselves in rhythm digestively, reproductively, diurnally, and adapt and evolve into who we are becoming next. We're going to be doing qigong, breathing, meditation. We're going to be getting into dietary and herbal tips for the change of seasons, as well as acupoints for stress and stress-related problems. We'll go into EFT and tapping for limiting beliefs, and we'll play with essential oils. If you want in, head over to brodywelch.com/mind-body-detox and claim your spot. Hope to see you there. And also, if you love live events, mark your calendars for my retreat that I'm going to be hosting in Mexico at Present Moment Retreat Center, February 16th through 23rd of 2019. That's next year. Get out of the cold and wet and dreary and come hang out on the beach with me. It's going to be super fun. Details soon. But Mind Body Detox Day, April 14th. Would love to have you join me. Now back to today's show. So in terms of, again, just helping people understand the Chinese medicine diagnostic framework of it, if someone is, for example, blood deficient, what kinds of things can we be doing to remedy that in order with our diet, with our lifestyle, with herbal medicine, like just what could we do to correct that blood deficiency?
Yeah, great question. And as you know too, I think there's like four really key terms that people could that women could be thinking about in terms of their period. They could easily kind of pick up from Chinese medicine, but the idea of hot and cold and excess and deficiency. So trying to pay attention to all of those, and for women in particular, a cold is a big one. Excess, certainly in the form of like qi stagnation, and then deficiencies that can come in a couple different forms, but like blood stagnation being one of them. Blood deficiency being one of them.
So if we've got basically, if we want to vastly oversimplify all of Chinese
Right.
medicine for the sake of this podcast, we can think about two things that can go wrong with the menstrual cycle that we've identified as the most common. Is like, one is that the qi can stagnate. And that's a form of too much. It's a form of excess. The blood can also stagnate. Like blood, pain during the periods, probably or clotting in the period is probably the most obvious sign of a blood stagnation picture. So those are both like too much energy in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we can think about deficiency, which we've mentioned. Deficiency of blood. We can also think about deficiencies of qi, of yin and yang, and we're not going to go into all of those necessarily, but just thinking of kind of like, okay, is that if you've got an issue going on with your cycle, is it more on the excess side of things? Is it more about something being pent up and not flowing well, or is it really much more about there not being enough resources to go around? And so if we could maybe talk about blood and yin, because they do kind of shade into one another, and that's sort of a blend of your common diagnosis and my common diagnosis.
So absolutely. So if you're looking at those two things, I mean, you might just be experiencing headaches or dizziness or blurry vision, or even just sort of tingling in your arms and feet. Those all might be signs of like a blood deficiency. You're probably going to feel forgetful and spacey. You probably would have a light period as well. If you're a little bit more on the yin side, then you might start getting yin deficient side. Then you might start getting signs of heat, and your cycle might start getting a little bit shorter than it normally is. You might even experience some of that might even affect your sleep as well, and you might start feeling more agitated at night. All those little things can all be connected back to sort of like a problem that we need that's related to your period. I don't know. Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's I think I see a lot of with so we talked a little bit about blood deficiency already. That's sort of like weak.
I guess we should mention pain too, of course.
Oh, yeah.
So yes. So and of course, pain is a big concern during the menstrual cycle. But that blood deficient type pain would tend to be not quite as sharp and maybe localized and debilitating. But although that case that I just mentioned with that woman, that it was totally debilitating. And that was one of the tricks of figuring that one out. But it would tend to be sort of a little bit duller. It might come a little bit later, perhaps after your period starts rather than before it starts.
Yeah. So this other pair, that really Chinese medicine is about the balance of opposites. And so if there's deficiency, we need to nourish. If there's excess, we need to disperse, thereabouts. And then you mentioned hot and cold as these other two yin yang pairs, this pair of opposites that one can't exist without the other. And obviously, you need. But in terms of problems and things that can go wrong with the menstrual cycle, one of my favorite phrases from the classics is the reckless marauding of hot blood. I remember learning that and thinking reckless marauding of hot blood is such a, because like basically the idea that heat causes blood to move recklessly or outside the vessels and erratically. Yes, so it can lead to heavy bleeding. And so from a Chinese medicine standpoint, you might not actually feel hot, but if that could be a symptom, or you might actually be experiencing some hot emotions. You might be feeling easily angered, or you might be having vivid nightmares, or, those kinds of things that would go along with heat. Tell us about cold and what that shows up in the menstrual cycle.
And then we'll come back to reckless marauding.
Yeah, sure. Or you could just take it from reckless marauding.
Well, I was trying to think of a good example. I don't have a great one, but I was thinking of, we'll come back to cold in a second, but I was thinking of also, and this is actually an interesting issue, I think, for a lot of women too, is the effects of birth control pills, because so many women use them. And I've had a number of women who've been on birth control pills for several years and then stop them, either because they want to get pregnant or because they just don't like the side effects, or a number of reasons. And then sometimes we see then you might see not marauding blood so much, but heat. And I've had several cases of women with like terrible kind of acne as a result of sort of transitioning um, off of birth control pills, and then have a lot of struggle like trying to get their period restarted, and things like that. So maybe, but I don't know, that doesn't quite fit your example, but it gets us to heat a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, but to get back to cold, which is such an important thing and something we don't think about a lot in here in the U.S. But women in China are very kind of cautious, both about sort of cold as this physical thing that it's a climatic condition, but also sort of like the things that have properties of cold as well. So cold food is a big concern. And
What do you mean by cold food? Just to pull that out for our listeners.
Yes. So it absolutely needs a little explanation. But all food and medicine, in according to Chinese medicine, will have this property of being cold or hot. Now it might be very hot or very cold or slightly warming or even neutral, but you can kind of break off all kinds of foods and medicines into those two basic categories. And in this case, it's not so much about a physical temperature, but more about its effects on the body. And things that are cold tend to lead more to pain or contraction, or a tightening up of some kind. Things that are warming can lead to signs of heat, fever, acne, um, anger, irritation, what have you. But so women will be particularly careful, both about cold is a big concern, and and if you think about sort of the period itself, it's about flow. It's about blood leaving the body, and we want that flow to be as easy and as unimpeded as possible. And something like cold impedes that flow. So whether it comes from like a cold food or swimming in a cold pool, those are things that people would be very cautious about. And I think those are lessons I think that would actually be great for more American women to kind of like tune into and pay attention to.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially, well, if we intuit, if we feel into cold, if you can imagine being in the middle of winter and being sort of neutral in temperature, you're comfortable. What does it feel like to have a big glass of ice water and a raw salad? It's like, what does that do to your energy? Like, does it help the energy flow freely? Like in my body, my stomach immediately contracts and gets tight. Right? And in fact, that if you drink ice water at meal times, it causes the stomach to physically contract, causing food to move more quickly through your digestive system than it should. And so it really, cold does it stop it makes things freeze up, right? We even cold taken to its logical extreme is ice. It's frozen. It's not flowing. It's not moving. And energy, by its nature, is a warm phenomenon. It needs to be to moving. One thing that is counterintuitive, I think, a little bit in our modern culture is that a lot of the things that can be hot or inflammatory, like that, if you're eating a lot of, let's go with fried food or a lot of processed food in general, that can be quite inflammatory. The medicine for that is going to be a lot of vegetables, for example, like that, if you, but better to have them cooked around the time of the menstrual cycle if you're dealing with a lot of pain internally, because then the warming, that effect of the cooking process can shield you from the fact that most especially green vegetables tend to be rather cooling or cold in nature, and you don't want to
Yes.
you don't want that to negatively impact the flow of blood.
That's right, and and you can also, and here's where kind of Chinese cooking can also help us think to this a little bit too. But you can season those vegetables. So you want to cook them, but then season them with a little bit of ginger or something like that, which is a warming, medicinal, and then hopefully that sort of balances out the problem. So you've got
Yeah,
something a little bit healthier, but now it's not going to be cold to your body.
exactly. Or even turmeric, right? Something that is going to
Yes,
increase the
turmeric would be
flow
great.
of blood. Specifically, we use turmeric in the Chinese pharmacopoeia to move blood for the period. And so it's specifically medicine. But yes, and mildly warming. I'm wondering
Yeah.
if that, so avoiding and the, avoiding going into a cold pool or in general, like that's,
Yes, that's important too.
mhm,
A lot of this, unfortunately, is sort of it feels almost old fashioned or something,
mhm.
just totally counter to sort of like what women feel like they should be, like the women's movement or something. What we should be, freeing ourselves from these old constraints of a different time. But nonetheless, I think it's important to be cautious. I remember very clearly after my wife gave birth to our third son. She was just a couple weeks postpartum, and if you think of the postpartum period as sort of is at a period of definite deficiency, it's sort of, in Chinese medicine, sort of defined as blood deficiency and a little bit of blood stagnation. Um, so women are very cautious during that time. And at that moment, we had a Chinese woman helping to babysit and help us out at the house. And my wife it was the middle of the winter, and my wife just sort of like walked out on our porch. Now we live in a not so cold part of the country, but it was chilly outside, and had the young baby, and and she was like maybe 2 weeks postpartum, just sort of hanging out and kind of like the cold winds of winter. And this Chinese woman who was working for us almost had a heart attack. She couldn't believe that, like, my wife was like taking this kind of risk both with her body and with like our child's. And so I think a little bit of exposure is probably not going to kill her, but we had to coax her back in.
Well, just
um,
just the idea that it takes energy to keep the body warm. It takes
yeah,
energy, and
yeah,
and really, if you've just gone through this massive labor, literally, and you've been growing another human inside your body, living off of your own body's resources, it's logical to assume that your system would be in a state of depletion, perhaps, and that
hmm
depletion
hmm
could be, rather than seeing it as like, oh yeah, stay in the house where you belong. It's much more like give yourself the gift of taking it easy and slow, and not forcing yourself to be in situations where that's going to require any extra effort or any extra stress whatsoever. So it's a time where really postpartum, taking it easy and not having to worry about being exposed to like the pathogens that you might get in a movie theater or in a mall or in a, I mean, like just that going out in public, going out in cold, going out in extremes, just allowing that to be a time to re-nurture and to nourish, to give back to the body.
yeah. It's so important, and another important thing to remember here too is that all women are going to be a little bit different. So um, one person may be a little bit less vulnerable to like the colds of winter winds or various foods. Um, uh, we'll all be somewhat vulnerable, but some may be more, some may be less. But sort of tuning in also to your body and just checking in with yourself and seeing, particularly when you might be a little bit more vulnerable, is so important. I had a super interesting case a couple years ago of actually, it was a Chinese woman who lived kind of just down the street from me, and she was having a little bit of spotting. She was actually about 6 or 7 weeks pregnant, and she having just a little bit of spotting. She'd got my name, I think, from that Chinese babysitter who was working with us around that
Mhm.
time, and called me up and wanted some treatment. And so I treated her, and it turns out Chinese herbal medicine is really great for treating a problem like that. And within 4 or 5 days, the spotting had gone away, and she was doing pretty well. I didn't hear back from her. Seemed like everything was taken care of, and um, about a week later, she called me up, and she was suddenly having like a lot of bleeding, and it was looking like she was about to miscarriage. And I kind of ran over to her house and brought her some medicine at the time. I said, "What happened? I thought we were doing fine." She's like, I just maybe she said maybe I got too careless. I just said I was out. I had like a couple of big days. I was out shopping all day, this and that. And she said maybe I think it just caught up with me, and we got lucky. I think we were able to stop the bleeding, and she ended up carrying the baby to term, and the baby was healthy. But it was a really scary moment, and she was just when I got to the house, she was just in tears. And she thought for sure she was losing the baby, and it was it was a reminder. She kind of didn't take that. She could have been a little. She should have been a little bit more cautious, considering sort of like she'd just gotten over some spotting, and she was clearly a little bit vulnerable, and didn't and didn't take that extra precaution.
And the fact that you were able to give her something that could turn that around is, first of all, really amazing and really powerful.
Yeah.
How does that work from a Chinese medicine standpoint?
Well, honestly, when in that situation, the first time I'd encountered that, so I was not totally sure what to do, but she was bleeding. She said, this is heavier than any period I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there are some medicinals in Chinese medicine that are really great at staunching bleeding, and one in particular is called sanqi, which is
Love tea on sanqi.
It's what's the I'm forgetting. I'm spacing on the Latin name.
It's Noda ginseng, isn't it?
Noda ginseng, yes.
Right.
So it's kind of in that ginseng family, but it's more about stopping bleeding. And so I gave her a couple of doses of that, and I said, if call me.
Yeah.
And she actually didn't call me the next day, but the day after. And when she did call, she said, everything stopped. She said everything stopped very quickly, which was, I was not at all confident that was going to happen. And then she said, well, then we started doing some more of this, continue this treatment we did before. And then in Chinese medicine, there's a number of ways to sort of what's called settle the fetus. And sometimes, heat can be the problem, but in her case, it was more about a qi deficiency. And so we had a sort of a whole formula of herbs that were focusing on the qi deficiency and things that will help to kind of, as they say in Chinese medicine, sort of calm or settle the fetus. And it ended up working for her.
That's so great. And I love that that in your explanation there, you're alluding to the fact that it's that 10 people with the same problem might have 10 different diagnoses from a Chinese medicine standpoint. For somebody who's who's having trouble with fertility, or who's having trouble with PMS or with menopausal symptoms, that it's not a one size fits all solution. It really does require a differential diagnosis. And because what's medicine for you might not at all be medicine for someone else, because it can be because there's so many factors that go into it. So like the energy has to be there, the blood has to be there, the yin and yang have to be there, the liver and kidneys have to be in good shape, and we need to be able to put it all together and figure out what is really going on with the whole picture, not just the menstrual cycle, but although that does give us an important window on what's going on in the body as a whole, and from there we can implement suggestions as to how things could be different, which could range from lifestyle to diet to herbs to acupuncture to qigong and various things. And so with yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, I think that holism is so important, so important. I think I think one of the difficulties for American women when thinking about their periods is that we're not used to thinking about the whole body and how it relates to the period. So we don't see food and diet connected to sort of the pain we may experience during a menstrual cycle. We as your example of sort of the overdoing it, the hyper young sort of lifestyles we might lead, we don't see that as contributing then later to really bad PMS or what have you. So I think we tend to sort of compartmentalize our bodies and sort of and the menstrual cycle being one of them, and not recognizing how it connects to things. Yeah. And so when we start to see those connections, then you can start to put together the whole picture and come up with a solution, whether it's, and often it's lifestyle is often part of it, and sometimes it may require acupuncture or herbal medicine in addition.
You are a powerful being, And it's really hard to feel that way if you're stressed, overwhelmed, or routinely overriding your body's cries for rest, nourishment, movement, and joy. You deserve to make time to take care of yourself and to enjoy your life, not just get through the day. If you are ready to stop putting yourself last on your own to-do list, you're invited to claim one of the last few spots for the May round of Level Up Your Life, my transformation incubator. We focus on the basics of self-care, but the kind of evolution people experience goes so much deeper. They talk about having more confidence in expressing themselves, finding their voices. They feel stronger, lighter, happier, clearer, and way more stress resilient. Like Rachel, who shares, I'm feeling more comfortable and present in my body, and I can feel the empowerment that comes with that, both physically and also in terms of strengthened boundaries. Thank you for this and for keeping me on this journey of learning, deepening, and growing. It's really an incredible community of conscious women who are serious about showing up differently in the world and living in alignment with the person they know themselves to be. So if you're ready to start living powerfully, I'd love to talk to you. Head to brodywelch.com/level-up and schedule your free call. We'll see if it's a good fit. Now back to the show. To keep going with this for a moment, because I know that stress is such a massive factor in most of our lives, and in most of our health situations as well, that in Chinese medicine, we consider the kidneys to be this kind of like pilot light of the whole system, including the hormonal system, and including that it's the kidneys. The kidneys store this precious substance that we call jing, and the jing is basically it's we can think of it as our life essence, and we can also think of it, I like to think of it as kind of like the sand in your hourglass, and when it's gone, your time is up, and you can actually slow down your rate of consumption of this beautiful substance of jing by living in balance, right? Not dipping into your reserves, which is kind of analogous to not taxing the adrenals, not stressing hard and kind of dipping into the reservoir for daily life, right? That this is something that should be really reserved for emergencies only. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily see, that the body's always going to prioritize running from predators over having babies and making the menstrual cycle smooth and easy and fluid and pain-free. And yet it's all very much connected. Could you feel that a little bit in terms of like the connection between kidneys and stress and what might be going on with women's health?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're so right to kind of point that out, and to again, it's part of it's recognizing also, I think, this like stepping back and looking at the broad life cycle in general as well. I think you start to see things like now we might call it adrenal issues in Western medicine, but in Chinese medicine, it's usually more about the kidneys. And you'll start to see those as you sort of hit middle age and in your early 40s and menopause. Very clearly will be connected to sort of kidney deficiencies. And it is sort of, I think, as you mentioned, it's something that's going to happen, but it's also something that can be ameliorated. It could be, you can have, you can go through it more smoothly or less smoothly, depending on how you, kind of approach it and sort of how you take care of yourself.
And how would you want us to take care of ourselves in order to maximize kidney qi preservation and therefore an easy menopausal transition and an easy postmenopausal rest of your life?
Well, I mean, I think it's really about tuning into kind of what we've been talking about, tuning into sort of what's going on. So Chinese medicine, in some senses, always starts with the symptoms and like what you're experiencing, and it's a matter of sort of tuning into that. So, I mean, you may some women may like really struggle with hot flashes during menopause, or the emotional issue may be more important, or sleep, maybe sleep disruptions may be dominant, but sort of tuning into like what is it that's going on, and then I think recognizing that something can be done about it. I think that's maybe the biggest thing. It doesn't have to always be just I must suffer for the next 5 years of my life. So I think maybe it's a matter of getting to your local practitioner and sort of beginning to like balance out those transitions and helping to smooth them out.
We have a
I
lot
remember
more power than we
yeah.
think.
Yeah, there's so much more that can be done. I kind of remember my mom going through menopause, and experimenting with like hormone replacement therapies, and I think that's still very popular for a lot of women. And as soon as she heard about, I don't know, the latest study that it led to heart disease or this or that, she sort of stopped like cold turkey. And I think she like went through like a whole, you know, I think she ended up suffering a lot more actually. As a result of that path than maybe if she hadn't done anything at all. So I think about that a lot. I think she ended up losing a lot. She ended up losing hearing, a lot of hearing, and I often wonder if there wasn't a connection there. We often talk about the ears being
Ears
connected
connected
to
to
the
the
kidneys
kidneys, right?
in Chinese medicine, and very quickly after she sort of dropped her hormonal replacement theory, hormonal replacement treatment therapy, I remember suddenly like, you know, she was seemingly kind of like the hearing just went off the cliff. So
yeah, and that's the kind of thing that we can certainly nurture, the kidney yin and kidney yang, and that can help everything from potentially bone health to cardiovascular health to the sleep issues that we may encounter that get more difficult as we age. So
yeah, absolutely.
we need to get to wrapping up at this point. I am about out of time for today, but I'm curious if people want to learn more about what they could do to support themselves. I know you are you're associated with Dao Labs, an herbal company that has a few different formulations based on Chinese medicine. And how can people connect with you or get their hands on some herbs?
Well, so you're right. I'm connected with this company, Dao Labs, and we invite people to come to our website, mydaolabs.com. And I think of us as doing something very similar to what you're doing, Brody, which is sort of trying to get the word out about Chinese medicine. And we have a lot of we have a blog, and I do a fair amount of writing for it, and we're trying to help make sort of some of these ideas more understandable from a layperson's perspective. And we have a number of herbal formulas, several of them that can be quite helpful for a whole range of gynecological issues. So yeah, go to mydaolabs.com and check it out.
Awesome. I'll make sure that gets into the show notes. So, Dr. Eric Karchmer, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today on Healthy Curiosity.
Thanks, Brody. It was really great to have this fun exchange of ideas with you.
Thanks for listening today. For more episodes of A Healthy Curiosity, you can visit the iTunes store. If you appreciated today's show, please leave us a review. This helps other people to find the podcast. You could also head to brodywelch.com, where you can find free self-care resources, learn more about Chinese medicine, and let me know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, be good to yourself.